So, I've been coding in Pygame for a couple of years now, having never previously coded in my life, and I have a lot of unfinished projects. However, most of them all have the building blocks I needed to make a full game. I just always burnt out when it came to creating the graphics, the stories, level design, etc. I just always fell out of love with the project, so the best I could really do is a fully finished demo of the game Quake 2, which is a love letter to my youth, made in the style of a pixel art 2D platformer shooter, with the experience and knowledge I've gained from my couple of years coding. Again, all the mechanics I've mostly complete for this game, but it was tough enough to just create the first few levels for a demo. Please check it out on itch.io, give it a download and have some fun. The link is in the description. So, the next project. I thought, what a better way to give back to the community than to do some code along tutorials. We'll be making, step by step, the framework for a game just like the one being shown here. A top-down ARPG Hyperlight Drifter style game. Hopefully it will be good enough to follow along and help many get over the barriers of how to implement common functionalities in their games that took me many frustrated evenings to fix or create, or many walks with a coffee to think through how to implement a new feature. More importantly, these tutorials will help you build a big project from the ground up while keeping it scalable and maintainable, incorporating state machines, character classes, character state machines, physics, open world room transitions and much more. This personally took me a while to get to this stage, and I suggest you make sure you at least understand a bit about object-oriented programming, loops and functions to tackle this. I now feel I can write scalable games with this basic framework, and I hope it will speed up others' learning curves too and save them many frustrating days of coding, as much as that might be fun sometimes, or is that just me? So a big thank you for the YouTubers out there already teaching this stuff. I learned all of this stuff from them, ChatGPT and Stack Overflow. Anyway, without further ado, let's get on with part 1, getting set up. Okay, so I've got my text editor open here. I use Sublime Text. I find it easy to use. You can use Visual Studio. There's others out there too. We're going to assume that you've installed Python and you've pip installed Pygame. So we've got an untitled file here. We'll just save this first. Folder called ARPG tutorial. So I'm going to save it in this folder. So I've already made Sublime Text recognize Python. So if I save this as a .py file, I'm going to call it game. And that's going to be my main game file. So let's make a start. Syntax is highlighted now because it recognizes Python. I'm going to import Pygame. I'm going to import system. And then I'm going to class game. So this is my game. In this, I'm going to do pygame.init. So I'm going to initialize Pygame because this is the class where the main loop and everything's going to happen. As we've said before, it's object-oriented programming, so I find it much easier to organize and handle everything. So we need a self.clock. Just self.screen. So the size of the screen, let's just call it, so my screen ratio is 400 by 224. And because my game's pixel art and the tile size is 16, this basically equates to perfect 25 tiles across and 14 down for one screen. We'll create these as global variables in a minute. In fact, let's do that now. So we're going to create a new file. And we're going to save as. And we're going to save it in here, in the same directory as where the game is. We're going to call it settings.py. And in here, I'm going to create a width, and width is going to be 400. Then height is going to be 224. I'm going to set my tile size to 60. I'm going to set a font. So this font for now is just going to be a string, which is going to be the path to the font. So I'm going to create a folder called assets, and my font is called homespun.ttf, and that is in my assets folder. That's the wrong one. I'm in the tutorial. So new folder, assets. I've already copied this font, so I'm going to Control V and paste that in there, and that's a font file. So assets is in the same directory as my other classes. So I can just call it with this string here. So that's great for now. And so now we can go in here, we can go width and height. But first I need to make sure it can call on this file. So they're in the same directory, game.py and settings.py. So I can literally just here go from settings, which is the name of the file, import, and then I could import width, height, like that. But with the settings file, it's going to be a bunch of variables. So I'm going to put an asterisk, which means it's going to import everything from settings into here. So I can access any of it. So now when I put it here, it knows it's from there. So that's great. Self.font. So we're going to use the Pygame font, which will be our font path, which I mentioned, and the size of it will be our tile size, which, as we recall, we've set here, which is 16. So we need a variable called running, which means if the game's running or not. We're going to set that to true when we start up. And we need to make a state machine, so we're going to do all this first. So I'm going to create a list of states. So my states will be an empty list for now. And then I'm going to create a state file in a moment. But for now, I'm going to have a state called splash screen. So let's do this. Let's create a new file. And we're going to call that we're going to call it state.py. It goes in there, and here we are. So in this state class, we're going to import Pygame. So we need that if we're going to use any Pygame functions. From settings, import all class state. So this is just going to be an abstract class to start with. There's nothing in it, but everything else can inherit from this class. So these are going to be the very basic functions that every class will have. So define init. So this is initializing your variables for this class. I want to pass my game into here. So I've got access to anything in here. So we're going to pass game into the state function. And then we're going to create a variable inside state called game. So self.game is now game. So we can now call anything in this class just by calling self.game dot whatever's in there. So we're going to have a previous state, so we can keep track of what state was before. It's going to be none for now. And then we're going to have an update method. And we're going to pass in the dt, which will set up in the game class soon, which is the delta time. And because it's the abstract class, we're just going to pass for now. And other classes will inherit from this. And then we can have a draw method. So all the update logic is going to be separated from the draw method. This is done in a lot of games, and it's an easy way to do it, and it separates everything, keeps it clean and tidy. So that's that. And then I'm going to put these here. So I want enter state method. So because my self.game.states, so if you look in here, I've got self.states. Because I've got self-game here, I can go self.game.states, which would give me states from the game class. So it's always handy to pass things through like that. But what I want is if the length of self.game.states is more than one self.previous state is equal to self.game.states minus one, which means it will be the very last one of that list, whichever one was added last. And then we're going to self.game.states, we're going to append self, the state, to that list. Sorry if this is more than one. And then I'm going to have an exit state function. So it's easy to just exit the state and go to the previous state. So that's great for sort of menu transition into your scene. And then you can just exit state from the scene and it will go back to your menu, for example. Or you're in your scene and you'll add the pause state to the game. And then you can just call exit state and it will go back to the scene. So it's really handy to have these. Exit state, all that needs to be is self.game.states.pop. So that will just pop the last state in the list. So we'll get the previous state. So with that, we're going to set up our first class. So let's go back to our game. Self.states here. So I'm going to make myself a splash screen because I want my first state to be a splash screen. So I'm going to create a class called splash screen. And then I'm going to append that to my list of states. Back in here. So I can simply do class splash screen. And then in here, if I put state, it will inherit from state. And we've got self again. State. So this means in the initialize function, it's going to initialize all the same things the state's got. So it will give it these, and I won't have to write any more code there. And I can just carry on with my next function. So we're just going to have an update method, keep it simple to start with. And then as for now, define draw. Draw pass for now too. So we've got a splash screen, we've got a state, and a splash screen. So if we go back here, we can now start building on our main game again. So I'm going to make a function called get inputs. This is going to be all our Pygame events. So every frame is going to look for key presses, mouse clicks, etc. And I want to put the relevant ones in here. So for event, Pygame dot event dot get event dot type equal Pygame quit. So this is if you click close on the Pygame window. Pygame quit is if you click close on the Pygame window. This is what's going to happen. And I've got a variable here called running. We're just going to set self.running equal to false. And then built-in Pygame.quit sys.exit. And then that should be that. And then if event type is equal to Pygame.key down. So now if the key is pressed down, it's going to return these. But I want to map all these to a global dictionary in my settings file so I can call them anywhere in my game. So let's go here and make a dictionary. So this dictionary we're going to call inputs. I'll put it in capitals just so I know that it's global and it's never going to change. So dictionary is just key value pairs. So the key first input I want is the escape key. I'm just going to call it escape. And as default, the value is going to be false. So that's key and value. That's how you'd make a dictionary. And then you can just add more of these. And I want space for the space bar. And I'm going to use up. And I'm going to use down. And of course, I'm going to use left. I'm going to use right. And I'm going to use going to call it left click. Right click. Up the mouse. I'm going to do scroll down. And then just going to tidy this up a bit. And that's the dictionary I've got for my inputs. So now, because I've imported everything from settings, it will also import this dictionary of inputs. I can proceed with my events. So if key down, so if the key is equal to Pygame dot key escape, then my inputs escape, so that's calling the key of inputs, which will give us the value. So inputs escape, if we remember, inputs escape is false. So inputs escape is now going to be equal to true. And if we do that, I want my window to close. So I can either click the close button on the window or I can press escape. So of course self.running equals false if this happens. And then we can do elif event.key equals pygame.k space inputs space equals true. Then I had some more. So for here, with left, right, up and down, I want to be able to use the WASD keys or the left, right, up and down arrow keys. So I can go if event.key is in, and then I can go here left, pygame.k a, then inputs left is true. We can do the same for right. Of course, D would be right for WASD, and this would be inputs right. Okay, up. W. Okay, down. And then I want to get the opposite if the key is up. So we can copy all of this actually. And then we can methodically go through this. So pygame.key up. And we don't need escape because when we press the key down, that's going to quit the program. So we're just going to have these start from here. We need an if first. If this isn't true, it will go on to this, else if, else if. And then event key is escape space, then input space will be false. So we just need to change all these to false if we lift the key up. So spacebar's pressed, that global variable there would be true. And then when you release spacebar, it will be false, back to false. So now I want to do the same, but I want to do it with my mouse wheel because I want to be using a mouse wheel in this game. I think it's, if we're doing an ARPG, then the mouse wheel's a nice way to sort of switch between weapons, I think, because you're using the mouse to point around and the clicks to attack. So let's go if event type equal mouse wheel, event button equals 1. So every mouse button has a value assigned. You can get this from the Pygame documentation, and so 1 and -1 here, scroll up and scroll down respectively. So inputs scroll up equals true. Whoops. Then we can go if it's equal to -1, scroll down will be true. So here, so mouse button down, much like key down events, we've got mouse button down events. And then if event.button is 1, so I've got this totally wrong here. So if this is event.y, this is event.y. So these aren't the buttons, these are the Y for scrolling. So if Y is 1, scroll up, and when you scroll down, Y is equal to -1. So Y-axis probably simulates up and down, and now we're on the mouse buttons, we can call the button. So we can work with the button. So the event button is 1. For me, this is a left click. And then if the button is 3, for me it is right click. That button is 4. So on some mouses, I think this is why I did this before. Some mouses 4 would be scroll down. So there's a little bit of trial and error here when I did it, but this is what worked for me and multiple mouses that I've tried. So on mice. So hopefully this will work for you as well. At least one of these will catch the scroll up and scroll down from the scroll button. So if 4 scroll down and it was 2 for me to scroll up, which kind of makes sense. 1 on the left, 2 scrolling up, 3 on the right, 4 for down, kind of. So that's that. And then same again, because these were mouse button down events. Whoop. We just need to get the mouse button up event. And we just need to change these to false. And then I just want to create a function to reset all the keys. So reset inputs. And here we're going to loop through this dictionary and we're going to make them all back to false. So when we call this function, it will reset all the keys and inputs to false by default. And then because it's in a game, we can hopefully pass the game through to all the other classes, and we can call this function when we want to reset the keys. So for example, if we go to the next state by pressing a key, we can reset that key so the state that key is not held and returns true in the next state. So here for key in inputs, inputs key is equal to false. Now we're going to do our game loop. So every game consists of a while loop where all the logic is called and the drawing and other things. So we kind of want one drawing function to run here. Can use. So let's start off our loop. So I want to tick our clock along, and we want this frame rate independent. So we're not going to set an FPS yet. We're going to let it run as fast as a computer can, then make all our movement and things that move frame rate independent. So whatever frames per second you put in here, it's going to move the same distance. So we'll leave it to tick along as fast as it can for now. And then we're going to, in this loop, so that, remember this is all while the game's running. So we want to put this in. We want it to look for these every frame, all these inputs. So all we can do, we can just drop this into here. Self.get inputs. And then we want our state to update. So remember we're making states. We've got our first state, which is the splash screen. And we want the update and the draw. So whatever current state we're on, which will always be the very last states from this list. So we can go self.states -1, which will get the last state in the list. Dot update. And then we pass in the delta time here. And then self.states -1 again. And we're going to draw. And if you remember, we had two parameters here. Itself, of course, defining itself, and screen. So the screen is here. We set the screen up here and we initialized it as self.screen. So here, while the loop's running, we want to be drawing on the screen. So we pass the screen into there. When we run our states, whatever happens in here will be running on the screen. And then again, display dot update, and that will just update the screen. So every frame it'll update the screen, refresh it. And then we need to call this. So I don't fully understand this bit, but apparently it's good practice to do it. If name to main. Apparently it tells Pygame so where to run it. And so whatever you put under here, it will notice it as the main file and it will run the code. So what do we want to run? We want to run our loop, which is in our game class. So we can declare the game as an instance of the game class. So now that game class is in here, and then that game, we just want to run the loop. So this is going to run the loop function. And this should show us something, I think. If we try and run this, so in Sublime Text that I'm using, I press Control B. And we've got a syntax error. So this is always helpful. Make sure you read what's down here. So in this file, my game.py, which is in here, so that's good. Define initialized itself. So, why is this not working? First, if I want my splash screen, I need to import it from this state file. So, from state, import splash screen class. Try and run it. Well, easy mistake to make. Just missed the space there. So that's going to frustrate you a lot when you start coding, but after a while they're really easy to spot and they really don't bother you. And what have we got here? Another error. Game is not defined. Okay. Okay. So I see what I've done here. You have to be very careful of this as well. So Python, it has to be indented correctly as you go along. So the class, the functions, and then everything within inside the function. That's the initialized, that's the inputs. And if you look here, we follow this line down. Obviously, I've missed this. All I need to do is drop that back. And then it should run. Okay, so size must be 2 numbers. That's because, so this, I've actually put 2 numbers in here, but it sees it as 2 separate numbers. What it needs is a tuple of 2 numbers, which is this. So in the brackets, we've got what it requests, which is a tuple of 2 numbers. So now, okay, name font is not defined. Did you mean front? So I've probably written front, typed front somewhere instead of font. So, which I have, it's here. So that's because it's looking for font, and it's found front, which is similar. So clever debugger. And then we Pygame window. And if you remember here, we can press escape or we can close it. So if brilliant, closes with no errors. Control B to, and then if I press escape, so closes it. Fantastic. So in here, so if you remember previously, these were empty state. So actually I want to leave these empty. So this class is empty. It's the splash screen I want to work with. So obviously we've made it tidy, we've inherited from state. We're not really going to use this again. So we can just close it off here. And that keeps your code nice and tidy. Same again, hover here, open it again. So in the update, what I want to do is I want to press a key and it goes to another state. So I'm actually going to create another state. So I can copy all this splash screen class, and I can create another state. And I'm going to call that my scene. So from the splash screen, I want to press my space bar and it will take me to the scene. So the scene also inherits from state. So how can I do this? So in the update method, as we say, we've got these global input variables. So if inputs, and we called it space, is true, so when I press the space key, it's going to return true. And this update method happens on every frame it's running. So whatever you put in here will happen however fast the game runs, 60, whatever the frame rate is, whatever you set it at, 30, 60, happen that many times a second. So it's looking for those inputs, specifically space. I want to enter state, enter the state, the scene state. So I can basically just get the scene state, which is this. So snake case for class names. Scene. And if you remember the state, it required a parameter of game. I'm going to pass that through every time. So self.game, because we've got that from state also in here, because we initialized it. So we can put self.game, and then we can call the enter state method from, again, here. So if length of the game states is more than 1, self.previous state is going to be that. That's the last state. And then it's going to append the current state. So it's going to append this state, scene, that we're calling here. So it's basically calling this method of the scene class. Then I want it to reset that input of space to false. I don't want it to keep pressing space. So I can just call on the function from self.game, from the game class, which was reset inputs. And that will just reset the keys to false, ready for the new state. Also, I want to draw something in here. So for now, let's just fill the screen. So we've passed the screen into here. So we can just call it here, screen fill. And I'm going to, so to make it easy, in settings, I'm going to make another dictionary for colors. So it will be easy to manage. So let's just define the basic colors for now. So black is always that 3 zeros. And white, value of white, sorry, the key of white will give the value of 255. So these 3 numbers, I recommend just giving it a quick Google. It's fairly easy to understand. Red, green, and blue. And that's 0 being totally black and 255 being totally white for each channel. So that will give us black, that will give us white. So what if we want red? Well, we've got RGB. So red, I want full red, and I want no green, and I want no blue. That should give us red. So while we're here, green, which will be 0, 2550, and blue, which will be 0, 0, 255. And that should do for now. And then if we go back to here, we can actually then just call from that global dictionary again, because we've already imported settings. Let's close the state for now. Back in here, and we can call colors. Let's go with blue to start with. And in the scene, we can actually just copy these down. So when it goes to scene, I want to be able to press my space bar again, and it will go back to the splash screen, to the scene, to splash screen every time I press spacebar. So if I copy the update and draw to here, so I want to leave this the same. So if I'm in the scene, I'll press the spacebar and it will return to the splash screen. So here, splash screen. So if I press the spacebar, we'll get to the splash screen, enter state, reset the keys. Just to differentiate it for now, I'm going to make it red. So the scene will be red, the splash screen will be blue. So go back to our game. We have to run it from here because this is where our main function is. So Control B. Okay. Blue, and then we're going to press spacebar. We've got red. If we press it again, it should be blue. Yeah. So press it. Every time I press it, it goes from scene to splash screen. Scene, splash screen. There. One more thing I want to do. So to display text on the screen, I'm going to add another function in the game class so it can be called everywhere and make it easy to just draw text onto the screen. So let's make a function for this. So render text. So when we call this function, I want to be able to pass the actual text into it as a string. I want to pass the color, the font, which we've got here, the position, and I'm going to make a centralized variable because your position, when we draw a text surface and a rectangle, it's always going to be at the top left. Well, we're going to set this so we can pass through whether we want it in the center of our position or we want the top left to be our position. So as default, the centralized is going to be true. So in here, so we want our surface, which will be font.render. It's going to be the string of the text. So whatever you pass in here on this function, it's going to be font surface. Font.render is built in Pygame just to create a surface or an image rather as the font. And then also, and then color. I think this is to do aliasing, anti-aliasing, true or false. False works better for this pixel art style game. And then color, and we want to pass the color in. So that's the only parameters that needs. And we want to make a rectangle. So much like anything in Pygame, you've got an image and a rectangle. And then you move that rectangle around with its coordinates. That's how things move around every frame on the screen. So this rectangle, I can actually, the surf that I've just defined, I can call get rect on it. And then the center of that rect, I can make equal to the pos that's passed in. So if someone puts pos at say 0, 0, which would be the top left of the window, then the center of this rectangle is going to be at 0, 0, so it'd be here. If pos was center of the screen, then the rectangle would be perfectly central. So I want the rect to equal this if centralized. So that's if this is true. You can put if centralized equals true, is equal to true. But I don't like putting this bit because it kind of makes more literal sense if centralized, which means if centralized is true. Otherwise, we want it to be, as we mentioned earlier with this parameter, top left, our position. So if you create this function, if you set this to true by default, if you leave this final parameter out, then it will just be true when you call this function. Otherwise, if you put false in here when you call it, when you call render text, it will do this. And if you put your position into the middle of the screen and you call false here, and it's not centralized, it will just be slightly offset and down to the right because the image, it's the top left of the image and rectangle that will be in the center. So you want to keep it as centralized if you want it in the middle of the screen. So I find that very useful for when I'm positioning text for your heads-up display and interface that we're going to code later on. So how do we get these two things onto the screen? So we've defined our image, or surface as it's called, a bit like a canvas, and then we've defined our rectangle and where it's going to be for that surface. And then we can just go self.screen.blit, which will stick it on the screen, and we want to blit the image, which is our surf, the position of the rectangle, which is our so that gives us a render text function that we can just use. So let's try it out. So in here, let's get these actually, make it so we know what parameters we need to pass in. So in our splash screen, we can self.fill. So after the screen is filled, we want to put something on top of it. So self.game.renderText. So if we had this, if we put that here, then that wouldn't show anything because you're putting that on the screen and then you're filling it with blue afterwards. So we need to do it in order in this draw function. So we don't need that because we're calling the function here. The text we want to display is just a string. So let's just say splash screen, press space. And then the color, if you remember, we've got our colors dictionary, which we can call a color from. We're going to make it white so it stands out against the blue. Our font will be self.game.font. Our position, I want it right in the center of the screen. So how do I get that without... So in our settings file, we've got our width and our height. So do this here. So find this a little bit easier, tidier. So keep it in one line as well, so we haven't got lots of code. Your width, height is equal to the 400, 224 respectively. So that's going to be the same as what we did a minute ago. I just prefer to put it like this. So coding is quite individual. It's however you like it. So with that in mind, the position takes two parameters here. So I want it in the center of the screen, so I can simply do width divided by 2, because width is an integer number. Great thing about Python, you don't actually have to put integer 400. It will just know that that's an integer. And then obviously you've got the x and the y. So the y is of course height, so the height of the screen divided by 2. So that should be dead slap bang in the middle. Centralized equals true. So remember it was that as default. So we can leave it as that and it should be centralized. And then we can go to our game and run it. There we are, splash screen. Press space. Press space. There's nothing there. So should we put something in the scene? So let's copy this. And then down here in our scene class, we're going to change this. Welcome to the game scene. Just for variety, I'm going to change the color to black. And then we can run it again. So we should go onto the scene, and there we are. Welcome to the game scene. And there's one more thing I want to do. So this is literally rendering this at 400 pixels by 224. Obviously, my laptop screen resolution is a lot higher. Trick we can use Pygame. We can just add some flags here. So directly after the width and the height, we can put another parameter in here. Pygame screen. And then we want it to scale. So if the resolution, native resolution, is a little bit different, it will just put the black bars at the right place so it doesn't stretch it out. I'm pretty sure that's what that does. So Pygame full screen and Pygame.scaled. So we can call those flags on that. And then we should, if we run it, it should give us full screen. Fantastic. Press spacebar. Yeah, brilliant. Well, those colors are bright. And then, I can't click the X now, but if I press escape, we're back here. Okay, so the next part of the game, we're going to add a player or character or an object or sprite, whatever you'd want to call it, into our scene class. So we can start moving it around and animate it, and we can go from there. Okay, I'll see you soon.